Well, good morning. Welcome to the Soldier's Cottage. This is our first summer out here, excuse me. We mostly came out here to escape the heat and the crowds of Washington. But don't feel bad, you're not the first crowd I've entertained out here. And I expect it will continue for the duration of the summer. It's very kind of the association to provide this hospitality. Mr. Stanton has secured the cottage next door. There are several more if you'd like to take a look around. I suppose it's expected I should make a few remarks. I only have a few moments, but I do have an appointment with Mr. Stanton in about 15 minutes. But this actually provides me an opportunity to say something that I have wanted to say. I well know that the recent proclamation of emancipation has created a good deal of controversy. And you know, there's one thing that's very important for any politician, be it president, legislator, I don't care who it is, and that is this: to take regular baths. Now, I don't mean this open water kind. I'm talking about what I call my public opinion baths. There's no proclamation or judicial decision that will long endure in this country unless it's supported by public opinion. And so any successful politician has to understand it. At the commencement of this struggle, I was informed by one of my generals that if this administration dared to touch slavery, the entire Union Army would revolt and likely march on Washington, surely disintegrate. Well, on my way out here last evening, there was an extensive train of ambulance wagons going out of the city to the new hospitals over on the west side. And I rode for the entire 30 minutes duration alongside those wagons, talking with the soldiers. And you know what I discovered? Most of them support it. And I need to understand how the people are feeling. We still have nearly 100 days before it actually goes into effect. And it's of vital importance that we do this not only legally, but in an effective way. But before I ask of any opinion, I have a few things that I would like to say regarding that proclamation. I understand it's controversial. There are those who have from the very beginning said, this should have been done immediately. It's nearly too late. And there are those who are also just as loudly and vociferously saying, this should have never been done. It's illegal. We're not fighting this union to free slaves. We want to restore the union as it was. Now, I realize that a year and a half ago when I was inaugurated, I made it very plain in the address that I had no intention of touching slavery in the places where it actually was. But that was before the war. And our case has become entirely different. And as our case is new, we must think anew and act anew. But in spite of those remarks a year and a half ago, I wish it to be understood. It's always been a sentiment with me that all mankind should be free. I believe it's of vital importance, and I believe it to be a universal principle. Now, what do I mean by freedom? You know, most of the people in the world are not free. Well, I suppose if you ask my personal definition, I would say, as I would not be a slave, so I would not be a master. That pretty well sums up my idea of democracy. But then nobody asked me. Mr. Jefferson defined it about 80 years ago, I think, with tolerable distinctiveness. He said, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. A principle of equality. It's upon that our little democracy was founded. Now, it's not the first one that was ever framed. I mean, I'm no historian, but the ancient Greeks had one, as I understand. When I was a boy, I read Aesop's fables. He was a Greek. He was a slave. Their democracy wasn't built on the same ideas as this. And you know, it only lasted some 70 years, as I understand. We've surpassed them now by more than 10. Of course, our government is at serious risk now. Most of the kings and autocrats of the world look at us as having made a noble experiment that's doomed to fail. Now, 80 years ago, this was the wonder of the world. I mean, in the age of Jefferson, my own grandfather, to found a nation on such noble sentiments as equality, which is really nothing more than a political application of the ancient maxim to do for others as you would have done for yourself. But it revolutionized the thinking of the modern world 80 years ago. Why, the French determined they were going to throw off the crown and try it themselves. The Hungarians tried it. The Italians tried it. No, not even 20 years ago, the Germans tried it, back in 45. But my friends, every one of them, save this country, was a miserable failure. The French ended up with a bloody revolution, one of the worst history could recall. And nearly every king of Europe quaked in their boots thinking of the possible spread of such ideas. It took Napoleon, a tyrant, to stop it. It spread nearly all over Europe, his march. The Hungarians fared not much better. What a bloody revolution that was. Failure. The Italians ended up in abject chaos. The Germans, most of the German liberals were driven out. Some were killed, some were imprisoned. But democracy, as we Americans know it, has been thoroughly stopped in the modern world. In fact, most educated, scholarly people are saying, well, equality, that's foolishness. That's old-fashioned. Everybody knows now that there's no such thing as equality. Some races are naturally inferior to others. I mean, the great ruling classes of the world. Look at the Habsburgs out in Western Europe. They don't believe in equality. If you're not it's a matter of family with them. If you're not a Habsburg, you're mere trash. Literally, they consider you rubbish. Now, farther east, under the Tsars, the Romanovs, they don't believe in equality either. Why? If you're not a Romanov, they don't actually consider you trash. You're just their property, that's all. They can do with you as they wish. And the third great ruling class of the world, the Ottomans. Now, with them, it's not a question of family. It's a question of religion. If you're not a Muslim, if you're a Jew or a Christian, well, you have no legal rights, at least certainly inferior to theirs. This is the only nation that has been founded and has survived thus long on such a principle. And what is of grave concern and should be to all of us is that nearly half of this country now has gone with the hue and cry of all the educated elites. The Southerners no longer believe in equality. Have you read Mr. Stevens? Alexander Stevens is a lifelong friend of mine. His great cornerstone speech. He says, Jefferson was wrong, Washington was wrong, and we intend to build a new free republic on the great eternal truth that the black man is naturally inferior to the white. Now, how does one suppose they're going to succeed in building a free government on the old principles of tyranny?